Okay, welcome to Red Room Poetry's States of Spoken Word. I might just wait a minute as people kind of gather in front of their monitors, which seems to be the new form of electronic community we're all part of now. Go and get a drink. I think all our participants have drinks. If everyone could hold their drinks up, they have much better drinks than me. All I had was apple wine vinegar. So that's all I could find that looked vaguely alcoholic. So because I'm hosting, I just put apple wine vinegar in a shot glass. That's where spoken word has been reduced to by these COVID crazy days now. So it's now ticked over to Q2. Welcome to the States of Spoken Word panel presented by Red Room Poetry. It's presented in and supported by Oranges Sardines Foundation and in partnership with the amazing Melbourne Spoken Word Festival, which went fully digital online this year. And this is one of the sessions from the festival. Just want to acknowledge straight up that I'm on Aotearoa land, unceded land, and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and the amazing First Nation poets of this area. And rather than me introduce, I think I'll go around and maybe you could introduce yourselves, the 5 amazing producers and spoken word artists. It's like gathering with a strange sort of distant and intimate family, people I really love and remind me why I love spoken word. So I might start with you, Laurie.
Hi, I'm Laurie May. I am currently out in the country in Mbantua, which is Alice Springs. And I run the Red Dirt Poetry Festival and excited to be here on this panel tonight.
Brilliant. And we'll talk more about the amazing way you've gone digital with Red Dirt soon. And the person who actually gets to be a guest tonight as opposed to hosting, Bennie.
Hi, my name is Bennie. I'm the director and founder of Melbourne Spoken Word. And we usually run the Melbourne Spoken Word and Poetry Festival every year, but this year it's the Melbourne Spoken Word Festival online.
Brilliant. So good to have you here and actually get to hear about, you've been doing so much hosting, giving so much to the community. So brilliant to have you here in this capacity. Ange, I can't handle the fact that you're up in Brisbane. What a place to be, having as a former resident. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Angela Peita. I work over at Ruckus Brisbane, so I'm a producer over there, and I also work in some youth slam programs. Currently Slam Ed, and also over at Queensland APS this year.
Oh, I love the kind of formal bio voice. I love that when spoken word artists go into like their mode of being.
Yeah, the telephone voice.
Yeah, it was great. And I don't know this Annie Tafu. I've heard about her reputation, but could you introduce yourself to
Kia ora. Hey everyone, I'm on Dharawal country. Want to acknowledge traditional custodians of this incredibly beautiful land. I understand the fact that even though I'm the daughter of a father who is Maori, I still benefit greatly from this colonial land that we live on. And yeah, I want to acknowledge the first poets of this land. And very grateful to be here. Very grateful that this land offers inflorescence so I can weave. I use the beautiful fibers that this country offers, which is so beautiful.
That's an amazing thing, actually. Like everybody here is like a multidisciplinary artist in some way, which I'll speak about more later. But yeah, I love that you're weaving.
I think we're fidgety. We're like, what else?
Fidgety, yeah. Being strange, being not on stage and not being able to physicalize things. I found that a lot as well. Welcome to the...
Thanks, Dave.
And then we have Zanub, who it's so great to have you here as well. I know we've only got a short time with you, but yeah, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Zainab. I'm calling in from Perth, from the land of the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, and I only became an Australian citizen a few months ago, so I feel like my relationship with the land has changed considerably, and what that means with how I relate to the people to whom this land belongs is much more considered, and I'm still learning what that means and how to honor them. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be in just for a little bit, and I don't mean to be a diva. I just double booked. And I'm just coming out of a showing for this new show that we just put on, and just like full of just like feelings. So here we go.
It's so great to have your time, and it's just really interesting. Like Perth has live art, and so does Brisbane at the moment, and then Bennie, you're down there, and Nam and New South Wales is an interesting place. But really appreciate you all gathering here today for this. Format's going to be pretty loose if you're watching, loosely structured, kind of a pseudo panel where we ask conversations, have conversations. I'm going to ask each of the spoken word artists who are also amazing poets in their own right to perform a piece of theirs as well. And I might get a few questions on the Facebook comment stream and ask those at the end. But I'd like to open with a piece by Zainab, a poem of yours. Let's open with that. I've heard it's going to be intense, which is totally fine with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think. Well, thanks for letting me share. This is actually a pretty old piece, but it speaks to a lot of, I think, what we're going to talk about, the panel and my work. So I thought I would share this. Also, I've never like sat down and performed this. This is just like a weird feeling. So let's see how this goes. But it's called Flower Gardens, and it was written after there was a shooting in a school in Pakistan, which is where I'm from, in 2014. And the Taliban killed 150 children officially, but the death count was about 450. And I worked in the aftermath in the post-terrorist response. And this was sort of a poem that came out that then led to my work with Pakistan Poetry Slam. So I just thought it would be a good segue into that. So I'm just gonna read it in a more measured tone, I guess. So here goes. The mornings in Perth are no different to those in my native land. The earth picks up from a slumber and groans a little louder with each hour. The birds rise first, telling you that this world will come at you, but that's no reason to stop singing. When spring comes, so do the daffodils. Yellow buds in full bloom, they are my favorite thing about the shedding season. So fragile and beautiful, I always pick them when they have just bloomed. I cannot resist. I almost forget how hard the soil cries at this separation. At night, I put their stems in water on my desk and admire how beautiful they look even as they are dying. Lately, I am told in my native land, mothers stay up long into the night staring at all of the dark. The birds have stopped chirping. I am told something must be given up for something beautiful to be born, but in Peshawar, there is nothing beautiful about blood. Nothing beautiful about barren gardens, nothing beautiful about graveyards in bloom. Too many flowers have been plucked from the soil and buried lately. All around me, the city is clutching to its roots. There's nothing luscious or green about its soil. This ancient city of bloom, I'm searching for her beautiful, but find no gardens and begin to wonder whether the gunmen plucked the children the same way I had done the yellow daffodils. Did they think them beautiful? Did they look into the eyes of the children and see bloom? Did they confuse children for flowers, the city for a garden? Did they also ignore the soil when it screamed? Do they not hear her now? Sobbing for her gardens to return. At night, I stare at all of the dark. There's left to set aside on a desk after this winter is gone.
I don't normally click. I'm going to click to that one straight away. Although silence is such an amazing thing in spoken word. You know, one of the things I really miss about live spoken word is when a poem like that and there's a particular silence that fills a space. I miss that silence. I miss sharing that silence as an experience. Wow, stunning poem.
I loved that. I loved it.
Incredible.
I loved when you changed, it was amp, and then you just went in there when the line about when the picking of the daffodils, and then did you aim fire in the same way that I picked? Like it just went.
Incredible piece. Actually, I open with everyone. Like I was just saying how I really miss silence. I miss I suppose, the exchange of somebody live, the work live, and the space between myself and the text and the performer. What are each of you missing about live spoken word? Like, this all sort of shut down in February, and you're all being sort of actively part of spoken word and poetry slam scenes and festival performance poetry production for a while. What do you all each miss the most about the live spoken word?
I'm happy to go first if you like, because I know Bennie hasn't finished their festival yet, but for me, I am done. And
we'll talk about it more soon.
It was really weird to get to the end, because usually Red Dirt's like the loosest poetry festival I probably in the world, in that it's just a random looseness. And one of the things we do have is we have an after party on the Sunday night at the local heavy metal venue. Last Red Dirt, the party started at like 7 p.m. and it went through to, I think I left at 2 a.m. To go and like sit by my fire. But I believe it went till 5 p.m. the next day. That was when like we went to pick some gear up and it was still going, and I was like, who are you people? Because I didn't know anyone there. They were just like, poetry. So I think I missed the tangibility of it, and I missed the grossness of being with other people and having people touch you and sweat on you.
Oh, people touch you. It's
hug
like...
you, and now you're just like, no, and then you've got to try and decide, how are we greeting each other, and are we elbows, are we not touching, are we? It's really weird. So I sort of miss the having the festival vibe of actually having people around you, and my house is festival hub, and there's usually like 20 people crashing all over the floor and couches, sharing beds. It's chaos, and I love it. There's a woman up the road who every festival drops off a big 15-litre pot of vegan soup, and it sits on the stove for 3 days, and people just help themselves, and there's always tonics brewing, and it's having that vibe. And I think, can I say vibe? I mean,
of course you can. And I think Zoom rooms after gigs don't quite cut it the same way. I mean, they're a great digital alternative, but I'll come back to that word community too, because I think it's quite key in spoken word. I'd like to come back to that. Bennie, what are you missing?
Yeah, I think similar to Laurie May, I miss like hanging out with people after gigs as much as like the actual gigs themselves. Like the kind of audience reaction isn't the same for online spoken word, but like last year, like the night before our closing night, me, Mike Ting, the individual World Poetry Slam champion, and Bill Moran from the US, we just went out like after a gig to like some arcade and like played Mario Kart like until like 2 a.m. or whatever, and just like those kind of like after gig conversations and like hanging out with poets and getting to know them like a lot more than just on the stage. Like I really miss those kinds of things, and we don't really get that. Like Melbourne's quite good at like all our local open mics, like people just hang out afterwards and chat, and we kind of haven't had that for months, and we just like miss having a beer with like friends and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. And what about Brisbane? I mean, Brisbane isn't in Meanjin isn't in a lockdown as such, but I mean, are you still all doing things online with spoken word? And what do you miss about that? It's the regularity too, that live contact with the spoken word audience and performers.
Yeah, I miss the other weirdos. I miss the vulnerability. Like people, you go to a spoken word event and people say the things that they really think or they really feel, and it's just not the conversation you get in the line for Aldi. You know what I mean?
It depends on the Aldi.
That's true. Maybe I just got to change the Aldi I go to.
I love that a cat went across Laurie May as you were speaking. As you said, weirdos, a cat tail just went like that. Well, miss Brisbane spoken word community a lot. It's always been a really warm place for people to start out and establish voices. So when do you think you'll go live again? How are things looking with COVID and the possibility of an actual live Ruckus Slam?
Yeah, so we've got our first event booked for like 2 weeks' time, and all kind of tentatively watching and waiting to see if that's going to be fine and if we can go ahead, but also whether people are going to be ready to come out and rejoin that again.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, I think a couple of events have started to pop back up that are kind of, you know, in the next month or so, but we'll just wait and see how it unfolds.
Annie, what are you missing about like live events? Obviously not having to produce them, but what are you missing about live events?
Yeah. I'll talk from a when I was, when we were directing the festival.
QPF, yeah.
Yeah. I'm missing because you spend 12 months working on those 3 or 4 days. I actually miss the moments that aren't programmed, the moments that are incidental, and it's actually exactly what everyone else has been talking about. I miss the weirdos too. I miss those, maybe not Mario Kart, maybe more Space Invaders. But you know, that sense of like, oh, there's some food over here, let's go and get together. So yeah, so many amazing things happen on the stage. We all, like, that's a guaranteed. Poetry gigs are a guaranteed good time. Like, you just know you're going to come across something incredible, but it's the stuff off the stage that happens on the street or in the foyer, or those collisions. I miss that, the unprogrammed stuff.
It's spontaneous. Like often the foyers at like a spoken word festival or out the back of the venue at a gig is sort of like it's a spontaneous exchange. And I really miss the kind of, the ephemeral nature of it, like being in a moment, and the participatory thing of being part of a piece live. Like it's not the same digitally. Like, that whole exchange is sort of very different. Zainab, what about you? I mean, you're sitting in an empty theater, which seems like a metaphor for spoken word right now. Thank you for arranging that.
Well, we've actually had there's no such thing as coronavirus in our minds over here, which is so bizarre and feels so lucky. So we actually are just ending a month-long creative hub where we had about 50 to 80 artists in a theater, just creative developments, conversations, and just sort of being together. And it ends today, which has been really beautiful. But as you guys were talking, I was actually just thinking about what I miss about the space. And I kind of feel like I've been checked out of the spoken word space for a little bit longer than just through this pandemic. And recently I've just actually been thinking about, we've had such important conversations over here. And I feel like in some ways the conversations are so circular, just around just big political social movements that are happening in the world. And also, if I work in theater now, and theater takes time to build, and there's an urgency to spoken word that is immediate, like all you need is your voice and yourself and a group of people willing to listen, and you have the capacity to shift perspectives through a personal connection. And I think I have just sort of missed that a lot, and through this pandemic have just sort of been like, actually I wanna go back into that space again that I'd sort of left for a little while. And I think so my missing is more about, I miss the form and the medium of poetry as a tool to connect people in a very immediate sense. So it's a roundabout way to answer the question.
No,
but it's, there's something about that, I think. That feels like it's empty in my life right now. So
yeah, it's interesting because I was going to ask you about that, and I will stick with you for a while because I know you have to leave in about 15 minutes. Just that kind of I suppose two things I want to talk about. Having seen you produce when I came over for Perth Festival, and watching you produce spoken word where it was across multiple venues, and it was taking, which I love when this happens, when spoken word is taken and put in a non-poetry context, whatever it is. I think it was like a donut cafe.
Best
donut cafe. And I love donuts, but I didn't want to eat before I performed. And afterwards, I was like, they'd run out of the donut I was after. Anyway, that's a small grief I'll put aside. I'm just wondering, and I'm coming to you about this, Laurie, as well. The whole thing of like geographic isolation, like Perth. I really want to start a West-East Coast rivalry. We need that. Let's start it now. Start a beef. We got 13 minutes.
No, because then I'm stuck in the middle.
Yeah, perfect. You'd be a great moderator. I love that. But I'll start with you. with COVID, how has that changed the sort of like how did a spoken word community that forms in more geographic isolation? What do you think's different compared to, say, spoken word community that develops in a city of literature like Melbourne? And
I think there's, yeah, sorry. Was there a second question?
I'll come to the second part.
Okay.
You go.
I think there's pros and cons to it, to be honest. So when I moved to Australia about 5 years ago, I was touring quite heavily with spoken word poetry and mostly internationally, not really in Perth. And my parents lived here at that time, but it really was the community that I had sought out the first. And I think because there's not that many of us over here, there's a really strong bond that is formed between people, and that bond sort of extends outside of just poetic practice. It extends into friendships and social circles and the conversations you have, like it does in most other places as well, but it's quite tight-knit, and it relies on that community to stay together to continue to sustain that, I think. So there's a lot of responsibility within like a few people to kind of carry that effort forward. So I think that's a huge benefit of spoken word, because it's so local. You kind of have to rely on just yourselves, and you're often used to being forgotten by the rest of Australia or not included in those conversations. So there's a lot of responsibility and ownership in the stories you start to tell, how you develop. But I think there is a huge con to that, which is those incidental exposures you get to other forms of poetry. So a lot of people kind of to get to the next stage rely on YouTube, or like maybe there'll be a more established spoken word artist who may pass by Perth at some point, but there's not as much interaction with people who maybe are more established. So there's not much of a chance to develop your craft as much. So when I first came, I sort of, because I had a lot more years under my belt and the scene was quite emerging, I ended up being a mentor in a lot of those spaces and facilitating and producing. And I felt that actually there was no exchange then. My craft wasn't growing and it was kind of stagnating. And I really missed that element of it too. And like you can have your online interactions, you can hear poems on YouTube, but it's not the same as you guys said, the interactions that happen after, or the poems you exchange. And in the US, when I was growing up as a writer and a poet, we used to have poetry shows. I went to Brown and we had a very dedicated community there called Word, which is where sort of Phil Kay, Fatma Askar, Franny Choi, like all those people came out of. And we used to have shows for the public, but then we used to have this thing called the third round, which is after the show ended, you would stay behind and you would share the raw and the vulnerable poems. Yeah. And that was the heart of the night and of the show. And that's where you grew as a writer. And I think not having that in a space like this means that you kind of get to a certain point and then you really have to go somewhere else to then expand.
Yeah. It really cuts off the exchange and the kind of, it's something I've really noticed is different for me, spoken word to say poetry, is that, the word community is often sort of front and center, and it literally does mean community. It kind of drives a lot of spoken word. I just want to jump over to Laurie. Laurie, just what was being said then, you're producing a festival in Alice Springs, amazing Red Dirt Festival, just went digital. What do you think that does in terms of the type of spoken word, the type of poetry that comes out of that space, and going digital during COVID for spoken word? What's your experience of that?
I definitely agree pretty much with like 90%. When Zainab was talking, when you were talking, I was just like, so there is often, and like when I came here, I moved down from Darwin, and it's kind of the same, very, very similar in the Northern Territory, being that one sort of block. Is there was only like a couple of people who were writing, but there was not really the sort of gigs that I wanted to. There wasn't really any gigs. Like there was the Writers Centre have their festival, and it wasn't necessarily targeted at me. I was much younger at the time, and so I sort of started my own thing, which was the Dirty Word, which was a monthly poetry night, which was so that I could have a community, because when there isn't one and it doesn't exist and there's no way of finding that community, you just have to do it yourself. and put that on and sort of like draw people in. And from that, I started the Red Dirt Poetry Festival as a way of making my poet friends actually come and visit me in the desert, because you all won't leave your coast unless
I was going to come over. We were going to come over, but then everything shut down.
I know. So I know I had flights booked and everything. So that was a bit disappointing. I lost a lot of money. But making your own community in your own space often means that, like Zainab, you're seen as the mentor or the person that's kind of leading the charge, and people will be like, oh, you know, Laurie May knows about this, we'll go to Laurie May. And it sort of means that I personally don't have a lot of opportunity for creative growth, and need to seek that out myself. And so how I've done that is reaching out to particularly David many times, where I'm like, can you tell me if this sucks? Because you don't know. And when you're in a small community, people either see you as the mentor and think that everything you do is gold and won't ever question you, or just don't, or like, oh, it's fine, or don't have the capacity to do that because there isn't that here. And so I've reached out to the networks that I've made through touring interstate. And also I try and spend at least a month a year in New South Wales. So every October I head to Word Travels Festival to be around poets and be around a community. And I spend a bit of time with people like Lauren Elizabeth and Emma Rose, and just make connections and just stay at people's houses. Like I sleep in garages, like whatever, just like house me and we can talk about poetry, and that's great. And I don't know if I would feel comfortable still creating poetry if I didn't have that space to grow, which is a really weird thing to say, but it's how I feel. So definitely wholeheartedly agree that there's beauty in small isolate communities, and that you can create community yourself and you really rest on it. But you also need to acknowledge that we all need to grow and learn and continue growing and learning as we grow in this world. And sometimes you have to reach out to other people to do that.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, spoken word, even when I was started, which was quite a bit longer ago, there was no mentors. Like the capacity to reach out in spoken word I've always really admired it in Australia. If you reach out and say, what are your thoughts on this? Or can you look at a piece of writing? There's a real sort of spirit of exchange a lot of the time. Zainab, I know you have to go. I just wanted to ask you one more question before you did, because you also amazingly co-run the Pakistan Poetry Slam from Perth. Tell us a little bit about that, and also how have sort of international borders and the possibilities in that space changed with what's happened this year?
Yeah, totally. So Pakistan Poetry Slam really started as after the shooting that happened in Pakistan, I was touring as a performance poet. And more than performing poetry, I love teaching workshops. And when I was in the US, I used to work in the prisons and teach writing as healing. And that space was really hard, but changed me in a lot of ways. And so when the shooting in Pakistan happened, I had realized that there was a lot of young people in Pakistan and across the world that I had seen through my workshops who didn't really know how to articulate their narratives. And it has a lot to do with sort of the digital world we live in and social media and people being out of touch. And I think the pandemic has shown us that that's a huge lack, and people have gone back to sort of connecting with themselves. But before this, I just found it overwhelmingly pervasive within society. And so I initially had just thought of just starting to have poetry workshops and bringing sort of the slam spoken word scene into Pakistan. And Pakistan has a very rich history of poetry. Like our language is very lyrical. We sort of use poetry in our everyday language. And so it's nothing new to us. And we have this thing called mushaira, which is sort of like poetry battles that happen, sort of like rap battles. So it wasn't a new concept per se. It just like was a different version of it. And so the kind of poetry spoken word that I grew up with was about you don't slam your words, you elevate them. And I
Oh, I like that.
yeah, I 100% came with that lens into the poetry scene. So it definitely was what I wanted to bring into that space. And since before I started Pakistan Poetry Slam, there was no slam happening in the country. And now it's like everywhere, which to be honest was the purpose. I didn't want to be the only one. I wanted to sort of bring this art form to Pakistan. And so we kind of tried these workshops, and there was enough appetite that it felt like, oh, we should have a gathering where people Zoha and I had met, and he wanted to come back to Pakistan and I'm quite tied to Pakistan. So it just kind of happened quite organically, to be honest. And we spent 6 weeks really mad, sort of going to every school, every person I knew, every family connection to kind of convince people that this was a thing that they needed to be a part of. And we got enough traction that we had our first sort of festival, I would call it. And it was very local in one city. And there were a few people who came from other cities. And what was really beautiful was we didn't make it just English. So Pakistan, the national language is Urdu, but then Punjabi, which is a dialect, also is very rich in poetry. And it was just, to be honest, like that first festival, it was incredible to see people from all socioeconomic backgrounds come together through poetry. And Pakistan's a very sort of classist society. And the higher, the better English you speak, the higher up you are in society, you know? So like for purely Punjabi speakers who don't really speak much English, to come to the same playing field as like English speaking private school students was just kind of mind blowing. And you could see people just in the crowds, you could just see people just shift and change just in their eyes. And there was something really electric about it. And so that started in 2015. And since then we have sort of developed partnerships with other key organizations who were either doing spoken word in some format or were doing poetry in some format. And so we've expanded from 1 city to 5 now. And those partnerships have been quite key so they host their own slams, and we've sent sort of like a format. There's a lot of sort of like, kind of like APS does it in many ways, but they don't pay us a fee. And then I usually do a fundraising show in Perth and raise the funds to run like the sort of festival, and it brings people together into one city. Although I have to say, over the past couple of years, so Zohab isn't really involved with the slam anymore. And over the past couple of years, it has been quite hard to sustain it. And my really desire going into it was not for me to be the person who does Pakistan Poetry Slam and gets all the look at me. It was about this movement, and it was larger than me. And now that slams are sort of popping up everywhere, a part of me feels like maybe they don't need us in that way anymore. So over the past year, I've sort of been shifting. So we didn't have a slam last year just because I'm trying to rethink what that platform and space looks like, because it's still the only national slam, and it's still the only slam that brings people together from different cities who wouldn't come together in any way. But just the feasibility of me being in Perth, and it was my baby, so getting that buy-in from someone else, and
I think
I'm sure you guys relate.
You raised so many great points about like the intersection of art and community and who and how it kind of elevates voices, and the need for more multilingual spoken word, and particularly in Australia. Like it's Bankstown Poetry Slam is such an amazing space. Anyone who's into poetry in Australia really should go there. But I'm really aware of your time, Zainab.
I'm so sorry. I feel so bad.
Thank you.
I want to hear from everyone else. I didn't want to be the one talking.
Oh no, it's okay. We've got time. Go and enjoy your work.
I'll rewatch this.
Yes, rewatch it later. You can put it on
the joys of Zoom. The joys of Zoom.
I know. I actually wanted to respond to you. So but I'll
respond to me and I'll listen afterwards.
So many,
I will.
There'll be so many great points that we won't get to, but I'll try. But I'd love to hear another poem now. Laurie May, have you got a poem? And then I'm going to switch over into our middle guest. I've got some questions for them. But I was wondering, Laurie May, if you had a poem you'd like to share. It's good to kind of break up
Sure. Sure, no worries. Yeah, I just wanted to once again second everything Zainab said. I
Totally.
feel very similar. So bye.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.
Yeah. All right. Before I do, I just want to address a question that just got raised about remote working in isolated communities and what other subcultures that we connect with. So in Central Australia, we connect really a lot with pretty much anyone who work with us. So there's lots of great art organizations. Like I said, we tie in and work with Black Reef, which is the heavy metal crew, whoever, if you remember, whatever. So that's kind of how we do it. But this poem is one I've written last year called "My Father Only Dates Ukrainian Women from the Internet."
That's a great title. If a poem has a great title, you've already scored like 10 points. Like, yeah.
I know. I wish it was funnier.
That's great.
It is. Anyway. My father dates women from the internet. Not Tinder swipes or love match coffee dates in loud cafes. My father dates Ukrainian women from the internet. Sorry, I got a hair. There's a market for it. No coffee dates, no meet you at the bar. I'll be the one with the red carnation in my lapel. Coffee club does half meals so you don't overeat or have to spend $22 on a sad eggs Benedict. It's thick, pale hollandaise, drowning overcooked eggs like long distance phone calls drown the truth. He tells them he is over 6 foot tall. He is not. My father hides behind a screen and dates women from the Ukraine. They are far enough away to impress while doing very little. The safety is on, his body a gun that can do no harm from a distance. He says he loves her, the new one. It's only $1 a minute for a conversation, and the agency matches you perfectly with the woman of your dreams. They are all younger than me. I understand them. On the other side of the world, behind the safety of a screen, he is her only one, she swears. This is love, this time, this one. I have heard this before. If we had the internet growing up, would we have spoken? Would he have loved me through an internet connection with the safety on? Would he have called every day, phone calls to hide the truth? Would he have told me he was over 6 foot tall? It would have impressed me, doing very little but smile and say hello in the same language. He says he is learning Russian to speak with her without a translator. It will cost less, but the safety will still be on. There's no coffee dates, no meet you at the bar. He calls at 4 p.m. I don't know what time that is in the Ukraine, and I don't care. 20 years or more in the same time zone and no phone calls. I am learning Russian. Maybe one day this means we'll talk more on the phone with the safety on.
Woo!
Love it.
Beautiful.
Absolutely love it.
Absolutely stunning. Thank you.
Bring in the feels tonight.
Love it. I just love, because I think sometimes spoken word producers who either run festivals or curate or put together slams, and like Zainab was talking about, really DIY, often doing the fundraising, holding the thing together so other people can have space, often aren't showcased enough their work. I feel that's kind of why I wanted you all here, because not only are you amazing producers creating community and community space for everybody, but you're amazing poets in your own right. I think that's lost sometimes, those that choose to go down this path. And hello.
Hey.
Coming to you. Yeah, I was just wondering your thoughts on where you, like, because you're someone who's been involved. I saw you emerge out of like the poetry slam scene in Queensland, which was such a, I don't know, so many, Scott Wings, Luca Lesson, Anissa Nandula, so many amazing voices have come out of that. And I've always felt there's a real kind of camaraderie to the scene, the spoken word scene up there, and a kind of collective, let's all kind of elevate. I love that. I'll elevate, not slam the voices. And I was talking about, what's your experience of slam, and from the time you sort of first got involved with slam poetry to now, how has it changed, and how is it changing in this digital space, slam poetry as a form, as a device?
Big question. Yeah, well, I guess when I first came into the scene many years ago, I think the kind of main slam that I knew about was the APS. So it was a very particular kind of thing. It was a big competition. There's a lot of stuff attached to it. And there were some really amazing kind of regular poetry events happening in Brisbane at the time, but I think it was in this weird gap where there wasn't a slam happening in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, we decided to create a slam because we wanted something really stupid and irreverent, and we'd been to Bad Slam, No Biscuit, and fell in love, and decided that we wanted to, yeah, kind of be like them when we grew up. Yes, and so, but I think Brisbane has a really supportive poetry community and performance poetry community. It's a really nice place. Everybody supports each other's events, and it's a really nice time. Yeah, it's been weird since pandemic.
My camera's gone off.
Laurie, we can't see you.
Oh, sorry.
She'll be
You can
back.
hear me though, right?
She'll be back. She's just, it's a theatrical device. You can't use props in a slam.
I'm so sorry. No,
That's
my
okay.
husband controls the camera stuff, and I don't know.
You'll be back. You'll be back
Just
soon.
ignore me.
So, keep going, Ed.
Yeah, and I think Brisbane are kind of really proud of being this, like, everyone leaves, no one stays here, which is totally true. Everyone does leave. Everyone gets good at art and fucks off. Sorry, shouldn't swear on a live stream.
No, you can swear on a live stream. We'll just dock your pay.
Okay. Yeah, and so we kind of are quite proud of being this, little like, oh, whatever. But the interesting thing about going into the digital space at the moment is that actually we've started really connecting with lots of other communities, both across Australia, but also across the world. So
in terms of audience or poets participating, what have you noticed?
Both, more so notably with poets. And so people who maybe had passed through Brisbane, or poets who haven't and had heard about Ruckus and wanted to kind of get involved, and people from Singapore and the US and other places submitting stuff, which is so lovely and amazing because we're getting this completely different voices, different cultural contexts, different styles, which we would never be able to get, normally because we're Brisbane and who's coming here. But yeah, so it's
everybody wants to come to Brisbane now. Like I can't say a hotspot because that's we can't use that language anymore, but it's a place of, cultural tourism. It's like, let's all go to Brisbane right now. Trust me, we all want to be there.
We do have some events happening.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Lots of places do not. Yeah, so it's been nice. It's opened some opportunities for us, I think.
Another thing that's really, so you touched on this, sort of the irreverent approach, which I think Brisbane probably shares, again, not being Sydney or Melbourne. There has been a really irreverent kind of culture of spoken word and slam there. And I'm really interested in, and I also want to talk to you, Bennie, about the kind of mutations of slam. I mean, at Woodford Folk Festival, there used to be circus versus hip hop. And now you've kind of started this like cabaret slam. I think it's really interesting. How does it push the form, and what does it do to poets when they're going to a slam and it's not poetry, and then they come back to their own spoken word? Like, yeah, I'd love to, any thoughts about, those mutations and how that's impacting on spoken word artists?
I think that the format of slam is just an engagement tool, right?
Totally.
And people talk about slam as a genre, and that's fine. That's a whole nother conversation. But realistically, slam it's an engagement tool, and it's a way to get people into something and feel like they have some ownership of a space and feel like it belongs to everybody in the room. So why not take that format and use it with other art forms? Slam has always been about accessibility and about not needing to be a high artist or a degree or or even an artist, really, to be valued and appreciated in the space. So taking those principles and applying it to other things, awesome. Like, great. How do we make people feel like the space belongs to them across lots of art forms?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting development. And I'll come to Bennie about to sort of extend on that in some of the sessions Melbourne Spoken Word have been doing, but love to hear a poem and spoken word piece of yours if you've got one that you can share.
Sure. I was going to read a little Time of Corona poem. that I submitted for Laurie Mae's Festival's mixtape, which was beautiful. It's still online. You should go and have a look at it. Yeah, so it was really interesting for a lot of arts workers, I think, when we all couldn't do anything, because a lot of people that I spoke to were just like, oh, I get to breathe out. Like, so anyway, I wrote this. I could tell you about the bird who fell in love with her cage swing, the way movement sliced wind against feather, how it felt so much like flying that she almost forgot the bars, how sometimes the echo of her bird song felt like the crush of flock flying north for winter, how she forgot about the feel of rain and could only remember feeling safe. I could tell you about the way water feels in a glass, how even after being constructed by gods who cast it downward to earth, even after cascading down mountains into rivers and dams, it has never felt full to its potential till now, till it is held back by dusty IKEA kitchenware, till it is big fish, small pond, till it is all this vessel could hold, and it is exactly enough. And if you thought it would go further, you would only see it overflow and splash and waste. I could tell you about the girl raised by captor, who learned to read his eyes like bedtime stories, who, should you come to her rescue, would close the door in your face, shaking her head and saying, how sad it was you didn't understand love. Or I could tell you how this morning when I woke, I was bird, or water, or captured, how I felt soft sheet against tired body and drew closer, how I saw closed door and exhaled breath, how I held small, quiet things in grateful hands and smiled.
So beautiful.
So beautiful to, oh, what do we got? We got a drawing. I love when I missed that. I missed that at Spoken Word.
I'm judging it.
People would hold up illustrations and
I love
response to the
it.
work.
I made you a present, Angela.
Look at that.
Best, Laurie.
Instant
Get
ekphrastic
it.
poetry. I love
You're
it.
amazing.
Angela got it.
And drinking water from the yellow cup. That's good to hydrate. Just
Water.
passing over to Bennie. First of all, Bennie, you're in the middle of Melbourne Spoken Word Festival right now, and you've been, I think it really shows the sort of DIY, community-driven nature of people in spoken word, and particularly in the producers, and that you've been giving, you've set all this up, you've had very limited funding, and it's all come from community, and you've created these platforms for so many people right now. So good to sort of, what motivates you to still kind of drive Melbourne Spoken Word? I mean, for you, what does community mean in Naarm? What does community mean in Melbourne? What does community mean in spoken word? And what does Melbourne Spoken Word Festival mean to you before, but also now in this digital space? So there's a little bit there. Answer whatever you like.
I think for me, like why I still do spoken word and why I continue to run events isn't really I've been thinking a lot about this recently, actually. Like it's not really for like the kind of poets that are like have been around for a while. Like obviously it's kind of a little bit about them, or like, the poets featuring. It's great to see them showcase their work, but the like spoken word community in Melbourne has always been about like trying to bring new people in constantly, like fresh blood, I guess, into the spoken word scene. And like and the reason why I started Melbourne Spoken Word in the first place was there was already like so many gigs around Melbourne, and we wanted to find like one central place where like if someone in Melbourne wanted to come and perform and get their writing heard, that they could find a place and find a gig. So like watching new people get up for the first time or submit, in this case, submit videos to be heard for the first time, like that's kind of the reason why I keep wanting to do it, and why you kind of miss that open mic community feel, because like anyone can kind of rock up to a bar and they've written something on their phone, and then they can get up on the open mic and perform it. And then finally people have like heard it and give them feedback or like respond to what they're saying. And sometimes it's not even about the art form necessarily. Sometimes it's just like a story that they need to get off their chest, or like a perspective that they feel like needs to be heard. And like in some way we're still able to do that online. yeah, that's why we kind of continue to do it.
I love it, and your programming, your producing, and the team. You can feel the intent and the heart and the drive for creating platforms for community. I love that Melbourne Spoken Word Festival utilizes the existing gigs to sort of collate them together under this kind of framework for a festival. What have been some of the advantages? What have been some of the possibilities with the festival going digital for spoken word artists in particular? How is it? I mean, I've loved again that kind of mutation of slam, the drag slam, and the video. What is it? Video killed the
Poetry Star.
Poetry Star, which is a great title. Those sort of initiatives. What have you been able to do with it? What's been different, hybrid, exciting about what at first must have been terrifying, switching a whole festival to a digital mode?
I think like in one ways, I really love how it kind of breaks down all those geographic barriers, and like for a festival that basically doesn't have any funding and can't really afford to like pay for flights, like I can like grab in videos and like performers from the US, like all around Australia. Like I feel like this year we've had way more interstate kind of contributions than we have in previous years, like New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore. Like we've been able to like bring in these artists, some we've seen before and some we've not really seen, and like kind of bring them all together so we could show like kind of a broader range of like what spoken word can be and a broader range of voices. I kind of like that the most, I think.
Yeah, it really widens it up. I was thinking of that also with you, Laurie, just in terms of, you know, spoken word festivals. These are type of festivals usually one or two people kind of driving it with two or three people supporting, and you know, funding is kind of scarce enough, and we don't have the kind of funding for spoken word, say like in Canada, which has the Canada Arts Council kind of recognizes it as its own form. Has that been an advantage for you too, Laurie, in terms of who you can bring into that space? You missed the physical energy of it, but the fact you could bring in guests and the budgets, you didn't have that budgetary constraint so much.
Well, I mean, look, I definitely did have a lot of budgetary constraints because, and a huge thanks to NT Major Events, Northern Territory Government, and Australia Council for funding Red Poetry Festival, just a little plug. So we do have a little bit of funding, and one of the things, like I said straight up when this all happened, I was like, look, I'm going to have to cancel my festival. I can't go digital. I'm a dinosaur. Sorry, Ruckus throwbacks, all Ruckus throwbacks.
Great, I love it.
I miss Ruckus. But you know, so I did have flights and accommodation in my funding, and so when I said I'm going to have to postpone, and they were like, no, you need to do something. So I was like, okay. So then I had to like really do a really quick turnaround and sort of put a lot of pressure on artists and also give them money, so win-win, and be like, what can we create and what can we do using this, keeping in mind we don't have flights and accommodation, so it meant we could up how many poets were involved in the festival, moving from 30 to 60. And then we could also pay people for development of those works as well, and more than we would normally be able to pay them, because we're like, oh yeah, we cover flights and accommodation, so you get what's you know, a very Northern Territory arts festival kind of industry standard, and then we could sort of up that to be more in line with the work that they delivered, and it also gave artists the freedom to think about what they wanted to do outside of a traditional onstage performance space and create something new and exciting. And if you look at the festival, there's pieces from Jesse Oliver. A Day in Isolation is just this random odyssey of random, and it's really exciting. I love it. If you haven't seen it, you should. And then we also got to reach out to other countries, which I think was the same thing as what Bennie is saying, is that it gave us the scope to reach out to places and people we wouldn't have otherwise able to include. So we were really lucky that my dear friend, I used to live in Uganda, and I started going to spoken word events in 2009, 10, when it really took off over there. And honestly, the slams in Uganda are just next level, massive, hundreds of people, like the biggest every week, like just magnificent. And one of the driving forces behind that is a woman named Roshan Kamali. And thankfully, I was very fortunate enough I was a journalist, an arts journalist at the time. And so we met that way and built that friendship. And they have contributed a piece called Identifying She, which is a really, really exciting exploration of the idea of womanhood, which uses video, it uses crystal soundscapes and visual responses. And so that's a 15-minute piece of magic for me, or that I think is magic. And I never would have been able to do that if you look at the costs associated with getting someone from Africa and then the visa process.
Can you put a link for that up in the comments possibly, so people can check it out? Please check out Red Dirt Poetry Festival. There's a lot of amazing video archive work on there. I just want to come back to Bennie. Bennie, something that you've really done in Melbourne Spoken Word is sort of de-emphasize your own practice, your own work, sort of go into the background. Like when I first encountered you, I knew you as a spoken word artist, and now I kind of see you most as a director and producer. How's that felt? How's that felt to sort of, because sometimes when you're like the producer, there's this idea that, you know, you have to sort of, I think they can sort of be parallel, but what's your experience of that? Continue your own practice as spoken word artist and directing a spoken word festival?
Like I kind of am still like kind of practicing spoken word, or like trying to do it a little bit more at the moment. I don't think it's like necessarily anyone's fault when like a producer kind of, I guess, de-emphasizes their own work, or like kind of fades into the background, like, because you end up being seen like producing events, and obviously you can't feature, I don't really like to feature myself at my own events, so you kind of, people don't really see you doing that. But I've always still like rocked up to open mics and entered slams and stuff around Melbourne. I still really like kind of the thrill of writing a piece for the first time and like literally reading out something you've written 2 hours ago on an open mic. Like I love doing that, and still kind of continue to do that. But I think like I stepped back from Slam-A-Lama Ding Dong this year. We passed it on to 2 producers, and like I've just kind of started focusing just on Melbourne spoken word, and then like from that started entering the slams again, and that has like been a lot of fun. Just kind of, yeah, I kind of still really like doing that. But like I have all these ideas for projects for myself to do with spoken word that I never really pursue, in terms of like releasing chapbooks or actually like submitting. Like if I'm thinking of going to a festival, I'm always thinking about how I can like do it as Melbourne spoken word, not as Bennie the poet or whatever. So I kind of end up
very
being
specific mindset, isn't it? Like it's not anyone else, like it's not anyone else's fault. It's a choice to sort of foreground others' work over yourself, and that's just the nature of that role if you take it on. But let's foreground your poetry now. I'd love to hear a piece if you've got one, Bennie, to share.
Okay, this is like a new piece. It's like a list poem that I'm kind of adding to as we go. It's called Affirmations. 1, the girl in the women's bathroom at Yaya's tells me I have lipstick on my teeth, but doesn't tell me I don't belong there. 2, Margot invites me out to girls' night for her birthday. We end up at Kmart. 3, my niece sees an Instagram story of me being told what inanimate object I am and says, I love her, but why does she have a shoe on her head? 4, the change room clerk at Savers says, this way, ladies, as she directs me and Margot to try clothes on. We swap dresses in the change room. 5, the internet troll says I look like a girl and doesn't realize they've trolled themselves by complimenting me. 6, some people say their cats relate to their owners by smell and can prefer women over men. After starting estrogen, we've noticed Mason begin to cling to me with the same affection he treats Margot. 7, Mum asks me if I'm now her daughter. She says I look like she did when she used to go out, and I don't know how to feel about that. 8, I can feel my body soften every day. I can feel myself soften every day. My skin's sensitive to touch, silky and electric. 9, women's fashion stole pockets from me, so my body has responded by growing new fleshy ones on their chests to store things in. Thank you.
Hey, that's brilliant. I haven't heard.
So great.
So good to hear your words, your voice. Like, yeah, that's and it's really good writing too. And actually, that's a good pivot to come over to Annie, who's busy weaving away there.
I'm listening.
During the panel. I know, weaving and listening. Or weaving you probably listen more intently when you weave, but there's sometimes like I think it's really interesting, the idea of spoken word as writing, and like the publication of spoken word, and obviously, full disclosure, we've just recently co-edited a spoken word anthology, Solah, Australia, New Zealand spoken word, and yeah, just wondering your thoughts and through that editorial process, both I suppose in the publishing space, in the just general poetic sector, literary sector space, the idea of spoken word as writing, that it actually can be really good writing. Like, yes, there's so many great performers, not everything works on the page, but you know, looking at people like Omar Musa and Maxine Beneba Clark and over in this, you know, Kate Tempest, et cetera, or Aotearoa, who's had a full theatre show in New York. Just your thoughts about
Kate Tempest's post this morning, by the way. What an amazing transformation Kate Tempest is going through.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's a real time of transition.
It's not answering your question at all, but it just shows how spoken word artists, how we as artists, whether or not we classify ourselves as a spoken word artist or a producer or a festival director or whatever we are, that capacity to change and respond. Everyone here, we're all doing that. It's that duality of leading while responding at the same time. Like everyone's had to go, oh, digital, okay, and go with that. And clearly, you know, Bennie's sharing then of that poem was an incredible example of change and transformation. I just love how we as humans and artists do that, and how poetry is that vessel for that change.
Do you feel like spoken
What's
word?
your question?
No, do you feel like, okay, stick with that. Do you feel like spoken word kind of enables that?
Everyone paused.
The intersection of community and art, and the intersection of
Is that Laurie?
I think it's me. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
we're fine.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey.
I actually, I'll come back to my original question actually, because I want to stick with the anthology, like spoken word as writing on the page. What's your experience of that, and what do you see with like the poets I named, and do you think we'll see more of this, particularly now with less live gigs, of publishers being more open to it, and what voices does it open up once spoken word becomes part of contemporary poetry in a publishing space?
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if you happen to see the Deadly Editors event that just happened on the weekend, which was that yarn between Arnie Janine Lean and Alison Whittaker and Ellen Van Neerven, 3 Indigenous editors that have just, you know, edited really significant work. And one of the most poignant comments made throughout it was 2 actually. Janine saying, it'll be problematic when publishers know who we are. That will actually be an issue. And I thought, wow, that was very profound. You know, in terms, it makes you question commodification of culture and all of those kinds of ripple effect issues. And then the second thing was Alison saying, it's interesting that all of the publishers have approached us. So those 3 individuals were all approached by publishers. And I think that I do think there is a momentum of, not that those 3 anthologies were necessarily spoken word, but those 3 collections, Homecoming Calling, Firefront and Whiu for All Times, they all feature spoken word pieces, and they all heavily feature spoken word pieces. And I think publishers I think the penny's dropped and they've gone, let's do it. It's on. And I think that it's a really interesting time to just be wary of that exchange of the publisher and the poet, the spoken word poet in particular. If you're a spoken word poet and you're being approached to be published, I would be talking to your community and finding out about who are these, who's this? Like, is it an equal, is it fair trade? Yeah.
It's a fine line between opening doors and,
exactly.
Commodifying something that's already existed in these spaces for ages. But what's your feeling about, like, you know, because I just sometimes feel like there's a thing with spoken word, and in Solidaire, there's some amazing New Zealand voices. And you're heavily involved in putting that section together, as well as the Australian voices. But I feel like there's an idea sometimes in spoken word that the writing doesn't matter, or there's not good writing, or it's just writing for performance. What happens to spoken word, do you think, when you put it on the page, and can it work on the page? And will it work more now when having less of these live events?
That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and I mean, that means however many human beings there are in the world, that's how many responses to that question there are. But the point is, it's happened. The point is, it's happened now. Like, the debate's over.
Oh, that wasn't so much a debate. I was just wondering, like,
yeah, and it's really good.
Yeah, I was thinking more about.
You know what I mean? It's
I was thinking about next steps, though. I was thinking about next steps, because, like, this anthology of spoken word that Peita did was in '85.
Yeah.
35 years
later.
later.
What's that one? What was that first one?
Off the Record by Peita.
Oh, yeah.
35 years later, another anthology of spoken word from Australia.
35. I reckon.
So do we wait another 35 years, or are we going to see more spoken word artists being by publishing presses? What are your thoughts?
But we're not going to wait another 35 years. We might wait another 6-12 months. I reckon. Easy. And then another 6-12 months. Who knows? Our publishers might go, hey, Annie and David, could we actually do could we do Solidaire too?
I'd like to see younger new voices co-edit one in like 4 years, you know, like best Australian poems. Like, why it's like this weird thing. And and when
I'd love to see an Indigenous led editorial, Indigenous publication, Indigenous voices, 100%. That's what would be.
Yep.
That's for me. That's the future. And having Indigenous editors selecting non-Indigenous voices into their collections, and having the othering flipped.
Annie, I absolutely agree with you, and I think that's what's wonderful about Red Dirt Poetry Festivals. I'm sure there are other First Nations festival directors and programmers out there, but I definitely sometimes feel a little bit isolated, and I certainly I love the fact that I can include so many different people in Red Dirt, and I love the fact that as a First Nations person, I get to put together this festival, and I feel so supported by so many people over the country, and I get to pick and choose who comes, rather than what I felt was happening when I first started performing was people would very rarely come to me, or I would be the token First Nations person at a festival, and that sort of like smacks of colorism and a whole lot of other things that make me really uncomfortable. So I absolutely agree, and I think we're starting to see that move in society, and as we're seeing all over the world, and we're definitely starting to see that shift, and I love it. I think it's great. Bring it on. I love being a First Nations program director that can include everyone, and makes me happy. So I agree with what you're saying.
I totally. Are you you know how Evelyn Araluan is at the helm of Overland now with
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
great news.
So that is another significant, with Jonathan. I'm sorry this isn't spoken word, Dave. Sorry, we're not talking.
No, because Evelyn is in Solidaire. She's a great performer. This all intersects, and Solidaire has a huge First Nation representation. You're a First Nation editor yourself. Like, these are crucial intersections. I think the First Nation community in spoken word, that's a key intersection, and we absolutely need more First Nation writers festivals, festival directors generally, and editors. Like, they're key points across any form of poetry.
All alternative, and I hate that word, but alternative voices. I think it's all amazing.
I think for Laurie May to say just then that you felt quite isolated, I really, really understand that. I really understand that. And to even have to say the words as a First Nations director, like having to articulate that stance. It's yeah, there's a lot of work involved that's beyond producing.
No, but there's certainly a lot of non-First Nations producers, and no offense intended to anyone, but there's certainly a lot of organizations and directors out there who aren't First Nations people that I don't know, try their best and do a really good job, and I absolutely love everyone who's ever programmed me, but it is actually really nice when we sort of not get that opportunity but actually fight for that opportunity to stand up and take over those roles and those spaces, which I know pretty much everyone here has experienced.
Nice.
Totally agree. We need.
Totally.
I do. It's yeah. I just want to go for ages. I'm just aware of time, but I was just wondering if you would be able to read a piece from Solah there and show some of the.
No.
Oh no. Okay. Have you got a piece of your own you like to read then?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic.
Why not?
Yes, that's great. I love it.
I was going to read the amazing Tay Tibble's piece in here called Assimilation, but everyone needs to go and buy her book.
And by the way, while Annie's doing a reading, if you're listening in, if you want to throw a question, in the comments, we may have time to answer a couple of questions. If you just put them in the Facebook comment thread, I'll try and see what's there. But
speaking of Tay, this Sport 47 is probably the equivalent of I don't know. It's put out through a university called Victoria University, which is in Wellington, Honeke. So Tay was the guest. So she's a young Manawahine, a young Maori woman. And so for her, this is part of that whole, you know, is it a renaissance? I don't know what's happening at the moment. Is it a movement, a groundswell? Young Maori woman editing this journal. And I was really, really honoured to have this piece selected. And I'm going to read it. I changed my mind because my brothers have been ringing me, and while we've been talking, and they're not living in this world. They live in another bubble world. And I didn't know how to message them back what I'm doing. Like if I say I'm in a Zoom, they'd ring me wondering if I'm okay. Like, what the hell is a Zoom? They don't.
We're all working that out.
Yeah. So this is for my beautiful bros, and it's called Hoodie. A brief visit is best. I plan my departure upon arrival. 4 flights of stairs lead to their place. It's a reinvented 6-pack apartment block. They hear my footsteps, preempt my knock, front door heavily locked, freed by clean cut keys. Fly screen flicked to release, held open by pressure pump. I'm greeted by my youngest brother, his swollen stomach and unshaven grin. Shoes off, socks on, family photos hung from when we once were. 100 DVDs stick tightly together on bookshelf. Mum's ashes take pride of place. A pyramid of pre-rolled cigarettes waits patiently. My other brother remains seated holding the TV remote. What have you got on under that hoodie? He's propped up by the only softness he knows now, the crevices of the leather lounge which he sinks into. His tongue is loose with weapons, counting cars, switching channels, clicking dials. I ask him how he's doing and what he's been up to. He tells me the smoke alarm batteries need to be changed. I pull back a heavy blackout curtain, hoping to find the sun, but instead blinds. My bros.
Oh, last line. I love that last line. That was brilliant. Wow, it's been so brilliant having you all here together. Like, I don't know, just people I've been in rooms with, and probably we've exchanged sort of spit via the mic. I miss spit in microphones even. That's how bad it's getting of a live exchange. Like, because there's something really visceral about spoken word. And yeah.
You're gross.
I know I'm gross. Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's always
I miss the lipstick on the
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Dave, are you going to read something?
No, I'm hosting. So look, I just wanted to thank you all so much for it's flying really quickly. There's so much more I want to ask. There's so many points that you've raised that are worth further discussion. I'm hoping we can
just keep it going. I want to hear more from Angela and Bennie.
But I wondered if, I just wonder if there's no questions. So I just wonder if you all had like a final, just something, reflection, point, quote, headstand, I don't mind, that you wanted to sort of add to maybe it was a thread from a previous comment. And just start with you, just any reflections on this conversation or spoken word or what you're really drinking.
Definitely wine in a water cup. I don't know. It's really nice to hear reflected across everybody's conversation how important the community aspect of spoken word is. Yeah. And I think that we cop a lot of flack for that. Like, I think that sometimes people are like, oh, it's not real art, it's just therapy and communities and stuff, whatever. But it's so integral to the art form, and it's so important, and it's what makes it special. And it's really beautiful to hear that it's the same everywhere. Everyone's living in these lovely little communities that are looking after each other. And making the world better through their little events. It's nice.
Oh, I have to sigh to that. That's so beautiful. We all need that kind of moment. Laurie, what are your final thought from you?
Oof.
Can you show us how your lighting dims? Like you said, your lighting can be dimmed automatically or something. Is that right?
Hey Google, please turn the guest room lights off. Oh wait, it's not listening to me now. Hey Google, please turn the guest room lights on. Okay. This makes it look like I have a really, really flash house.
It does.
I know. No. It's my husband is really, really, really over the top with anything technology, and he's really good at like smelling out a good deal. And so he found all these lights that he could plug into everything that are smart, and then you talk to them, and then they do. So the whole house is on it. You can do everything in my house. You can do heaters, fans, lights, the oven, everything, the fucking washing machine, everything is on this system. So when the power goes out, though, which happens a lot, we live in Alice Springs, and unfortunately we have had a liberal government for quite some time. And not only did they, that's the national government that wrecked the NBN, isn't it? But the NBN and the power system is just atrocious. So when the power's out, we can't do anything, and we're just like, oh, what do we do now? Oh no, we don't know how to turn anything on without it. So it's a real because you don't have power. Internet, what he's yelling at me, go away. Shh. Also he likes to yell at me a lot about that I'm getting things wrong, whatever. I just want to say, like, for me, one of the most important things about spoken word and poetry and being in this community is being able to reach out to people. I know in particular I've spoken a lot to Angela over the last few weeks, whenever I'm stressed or whenever there's something going on, particularly with running events, as I'm sure Bennie, I don't want to assume, but like I feel like we all sort of go through a lot of challenges being festival directors or being creators and programmers, and that there is always negativity that tries to pervade your space, and people are always going to criticize you, and people are always going to have their own opinion, which they're entitled to. But for me, I respond, and I like to be able to reach out and talk to people. I know Angela has been super supportive of me, and we've engaged in a lot of conversations this week where it's like, let's just get all the negativity out of this phone call now so we can go on to being positive. And I know, so I just want to say, like, anyone who's organizing something, whether it's Bennie or Annie or David or Angela, whoever is listening, and you're organizing something and you sometimes need someone to talk to, is that I'm always available for a yarn, and always here to support you the way that so many people out there have supported me through my times of need.
So beautiful, Laurie. You did an
Oh,
amazing
cool.
job with Red Dirt. Thank you so much. And it feels like we should go to Bennie. I know that would resonate with you on lots of levels. What are your final thoughts?
I kind of wanted to come back to what Anne-Marie was saying before about the like, I guess the transformative nature of spoken word or whatever, and like K Tempest coming out. I thought that was like really like I really loved seeing that. And I think like the reason why we keep doing what we do, like organizing spoken word stuff, and why we keep kind of supporting the community is kind of, it gives a lot back to us as well. And I've definitely found over the last year, like I've been able to process and like talk about a lot of things that have been happening to me and like my own transition through spoken word. Like obviously I like see like a proper therapist and all that, but like poetry and like talking openly about like that sort of stuff, like publicly, like people very publicly watching me transition, like literally on stages and like in front of cameras and stuff. Like I found that really useful and really helpful to be able to do that. And like I don't know whether I would be in the same position to transition if it wasn't for the spoken word community, because it is like one of those really supportive and beautiful spaces. And like I always go back to thinking about that sort of stuff, and like that's why I do spoken word. Like there is always like going to be like detractors or critics and people who feel like they're kind of not getting out of you what they want. So you can kind of focus on them, or you can focus on the more wholly positive people who kind of want to give back in that way, that kind of exchange of community and support that like you kind of get. Like I get it in Melbourne, but then I also get it when I go to like other festivals and meet people like for the first time through like Queensland Poetry Festival or APS. Like I really love that as well, like meeting like so many new people, and like I get a lot out of doing that.
Brilliant. I love that. And just know you've done a brilliant job. And it's not just the Melbourne community. Yeah, every community in spoken word is, and with Red Dirt as well, loving what you've both done in the digital space with so little resources and time. Final words, Annie.
Self-care, prioritize self-care. Self-care is revolutionary.
Yeah. So true. I wish I had said that many times, many years ago.
Same.
It's so true though. It is like, if you put the art and the community ahead of yourself, that's so true, isn't it? You can't do that. Yeah.
It's not selfish. It's self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful, is there something else you want to add?
Just thank you, Dave, for being such a generous host. Because you've been around longer than all of us put together.
Okay, let's not go. Let's not go there. That's a great ending point. Okay, States of Spoken Word with hosted by Old Man David Stavanger and the fantastic Laurie, Zainab, Bennie, and Annie. I really want to thank Red Room Poetry, and we're like, let's not just support poets on the page through In Your Hands, but let's support some spoken word producers during these times, because a lot of people are doing a lot with very little. And also to Oranges Sardines for supporting this. Everybody have a great night and drink something out of a dubious coffee cup.
I love you guys.
I kind of want to stay on, like not be live, but we all just stay here.
How do I, Bennie, how do I do
that? Can you just end the stream? End the stream, but not end the panel, end the call.
Go on live. We don't need the.
Are we still live in all of this?
Yes, we're still live.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. We can resume back in after. Let's resume back in. Okay, I'm going to go officially. And then use the same link. Bye.
Okay,
Bye.